Welcome back to another episode of How to Become an Obstacle Buster. I'm your host, Warren Wandling, the show that's dedicated to bringing leaders and entrepreneurs strategies, tips, and resources to overcome their obstacles, to build resilience, and achieve success. Hey, if this is your first time listening or you've been part of our community for a while, thank you for tuning in today. Before I introduce you to my guest today, I want to make sure that you're aware of a new resource to help you to be resilient. It's our private Facebook community called Leadership with Purpose. So you can either search in groups in Facebook and search Leadership with Purpose. And I'll also make sure that link is in the show notes as well. In our community, I share strategies, tips, and resources so you can step into less stress, greater profit, and experience the work you love. It's also a great place to connect with other like-minded leaders. So I look forward to seeing you in our community. Our sponsor for the show today is Audible. If you love listening to podcasts, I know you're going to love Audible like I do. It's a great way to be able to listen to books that you want to read this year. So if you're not already subscribed to Audible, let me get you a free book and a free 30-day trial. The book that I recommend is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. By simply visiting warrenwandling.com/audible, you can grab your free book and your free 30-day trial to Audible. Again, that's warrenwandling.com/audible. WARRENWANDLING.com/AUDIBLE. I have a great guest with me today, Bill Eckstrom. He is the founder and CEO of Excel Institute, the world's first and only organization to measure and quantify leadership effectiveness. He is considered one of the world's top authorities in metric-based performance coaching and growth. His book, The Coaching Effect, co-authored by Excel Institute President Sarah Worth, helps leaders at all levels understand the necessity of challenging people out of their comfort zone to create high-growth organizations. Hey, welcome to the show, Bill.
Thank you, Warren. It's fun to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have our conversation today. As you might know, on How to Become an Obstacle Buster podcast, we help leaders and entrepreneurs to break through their obstacles, to build resilience, and achieve success. So to start that conversation today, as the founder and CEO of Excel Institute, author and speaker, tell us about your business.
We've had to bust through a lot of obstacles to become a business, that's for darn sure, overcome quite a few as well. The Excel Institute, Warren, by the way, thank you for asking, is an organization that measures, quantifies leadership and coaching effectiveness. Obviously, our foundation, I shouldn't say obviously, but our foundation is in the sales world because it's easier to quantify and measure effectiveness of leaders and coaching in that industry. But since that time, we've been asked to move throughout the balance of organizations to understand the effectiveness that the leaders are having on the people on their teams, as well as now athletics and education. So we've branched out, I think as a result of our findings and our research, to a lot of different places.
Well, excellent. So dealing with the clientele that you deal with, what's the greatest obstacle that they encounter?
I think, well, it's the two are not even somewhat, they're inextricably linked. The biggest obstacle they encounter is really understanding how to consistently grow. And as generic as that sounds, organizations don't know what's creating growth or lack thereof. And so they don't know how to sustain growth, number one. But number two, what's linked to that is they don't understand, or nor can they quantify the impact their leaders are having on the growth of their people and their teams. And without understanding that, it's really hard to sustain it.
Is there a common denominator that you see with different clients of what is that's really causing the growth or not causing the growth?
Well, there's not just a single thing. There's a series of things, but at a high level, so we refer to it as coaching. Anytime you have a team involved, whether it's athletics or whether it's business, it really doesn't matter. We look at a leader's job more of that of a high performance, high growth coach, and we do classic leadership models. But there's really the quantity of their coaching and the quality of their coaching is what it boils down to. So it always boils down to those two things. And those are both measurable components where we can measure activities and behaviors within organizations to help them understand that. So if a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, my team's not performing, and someone will say, well, you got to coach them up. Well, while that makes sense at the surface, but if you suck as a coach, what you're saying is go spend more time with the people in which, if you're bad at it, you're actually prohibiting performance. So that's where the quality component comes in. So there's themes that we look at for quality of coaching, and then there are what we call high growth activities that coaches and leaders need to execute against in order to be most effective.
So within, as you're building your business, what kind of key strategies that helped you develop your business?
It's a really good question. First and foremost for me, it was really identifying and acquiring the most talented people. And when you have people on board where you don't have to teach them how to treat customers, that's just woven into their DNA, then we're just working on refining skills. When you hire people that are just naturally gifted at sales, then we're just working on what it is we're selling. So I think the identification and acquisition of talent is number one for us. And then number two on top of that is we have to walk the talk. And once you get talented people on board, you have to invest in them, number one, in terms of the relationship. We work very, very hard at developing trust-based relationships throughout our team. And then on top of that are the other components of performance, but starts with talent and then it moves over to the relationship component.
And that's a key aspect to the trust-based relationship.
It is. It's endemic. When we measure organizations and high-performing teams or even low-performing teams, trust-based connections between employees as well as leaders and their employees is endemic to high-performing teams. You'll never see a high-performing team without that relationship in place. Let me qualify that. Every now and then you can see a high-performing team that's led through fear or intimidation, but it's not sustainable. It cannot be sustained without that trust-based relationship in place.
So with clients that are trying to build that trust and trying to make that transition of believing in the process, that as they build trust, they will actually grow their business. But sometimes there might be some resistance to building that trust because their old methods of management or leadership has gotten them to a certain level, but to take the business to the next level, they really have to establish a trust relationship. How have you worked with clients in that kind of that model?
Oh, sure. And keep in mind, trust, while it's endemic, it is the foundation. There are other components on top of that. In our book that I know you have referred to, or you in our correspondence, The Coaching Effect, one of the most profound findings in our research beyond trust is having leaders that challenge people, create discomfort. And without trust in place, if you, Warren, are my boss and you're trying to push me and create to challenge me to create more growth, if I don't trust you, I view you as someone who's just very selfish and doing it, trying to do what's best for the company only, not having anything about me in mind. But with trust in place, then you've earned the right to push me, to challenge me, to help me grow in those areas as well. So there's a trust component, there's a challenge component, and then there's also what we refer to as an order component to the highest performing teams.
Yeah, excellent. So I'm really curious, how do you measure ROI using coaching with a leadership team?
Well, in sales, it's easy.
Yeah.
So what we do in sales, and the way to understand this is, first you have to understand what the leaders are doing, and then you have to understand how well they're doing that. And then if you do that over enough time, you can correlate that to sales results, and then it spits out a number. For example, we know the coaches that do the right, are the leaders that do the right coaching activities. They do them with, they do them 26% more often than the lower performing leaders. They do it with 18% better quality. That results in $4.3 million more revenue on average per team. That's the gap between the top 20% of leaders and the bottom 80%, is their teams produce $4.3 million more. And the only way to do that is to measure it. Measure quantity of coaching and measure quality of coaching.
Oh, interesting. So based on the level of coaching and the quality of that coach, then when you're working with your clients, they can have a clear measurement of that coaching is working, and you can make an adjustments based on that coach's ability to get those results then.
Yeah, well said. And I'll put it in a very realistic sense. Let's say you're, we'll use sales again. Let's say you're an executive sales leader, Warren, which you understand this well, given your background, and a frontline sales manager who has seven salespeople reporting to this person. And this person reports to you. This sales manager comes to you and says, Warren, I want my team to hit a bigger number next year. What do I, as a leader of this team, as a coach of this team, what do I need to do more of, or perhaps even less of? And if you're not measuring, if you don't understand what they're doing or how well they're doing it now, how would you ever answer that question? Right. Exactly. Yeah, you wouldn't know where to start. Right. I mean, if a salesperson came to a sales leader and said, hey, I want to sell more next year, you see, you go, you look at their metrics, right? How many calls they've made, how many points they've had, the ratio of opens to closes, how fast things move through their pipeline. And you could give them very sound advice and guidance based on data and metrics. But nobody's capturing data and metrics on coaching. And the ironic part of that is, if you ask executive leaders, from which we've done from throughout the world, and you ask them a question to say, hey, do you believe the performance of your teams are a reflection of how they're coached, led, and managed? Almost 100%, it's like 99%, say, well, of course I do. Yes, absolutely. They're a reflection of that. Great. What are your sales leaders, what are your coaches, leaders, and managers doing? And they can't answer. Yeah, exactly. So so in coaching, I think, since it's, inception, if we were going to measure it, some say it was the late in the 90s, early, definitely 2000s. And with coaching, the term started to emerge in the industry. And I think even today, it's that it's starting to be more accepted in reference to at least the terminology and engaging a coach. But can you share with our listeners kind of what the coaching impact has on a team's growth? Well, we know that when we take as many of the variables within and then without of our research, the number one impact on a team growth is the behaviors of their manager, of their boss, period. It's that simple. So, and I've already thrown out some of the numbers of what they're worth, but it's everything leaders do and say impacts what we refer to as the discretionary effort of the people that report to them. And if a coach's job is to create discretionary effort, and when I use that term, Warren, what I mean is that a salesperson, for example, if their manager is sick or goes on vacation, the salespeople still work, right? Right. They're paid to. That's what they do. They sell. So discretionary effort refers to how much more do they sell? How much more gets done as a result of having a coach or a leader? And if a sales team will produce $10 million without a boss, they better produce 12 or 14 million with the boss. That gap, that delta, is the economic difference a manager means to that organization. That gap is what we refer to as discretionary effort. You can use it in athletics, you can use it all across business, but that's really, quite frankly, a leader's role is to create that discretionary effort.
Very interesting. And I love the use of what they say and what they do and measuring that, because that's impacting the organization. And I like to say, like, anything what enters the system impacts the system. So being aware how that leader is showing up and leading can impact it positively or negatively.
That's exactly right. And that's well said. And one of the things that, for example, we see that, and we talk about this in the book, that more leaders need to do is ask questions. So often the transition from, and again, back to sales as an example, from salesperson to sales manager or sales leader, I go from, being successful as a salesperson, I'm asking questions, I'm digging, I'm probing. And all of a sudden I become a boss and I start telling.
Thanks.
And the questions are still so powerful. They increase psychological safety. They increase engagement. There's so many positive things. So part of the role of a leader is not to have all the answers, but is certainly to have the best questions.
Yeah, exactly. The powerful questions really help drive the team instead of telling.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in your TEDx talk, it was entitled "Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life." You share an impactful story about your experience in your career that caused deep discomfort. Can you share that impactful story?
Well, yeah, that story, ironically, was never intended to be shared. Talk about the collaboration and power of teams versus just a single person. Our team recommended that I start that TED Talk with that story. And the story is about, I was a senior VP of Biz Dev in a publicly traded company. And on January 8th at 3:00 in the afternoon, the president of the company, the person to whom I reported, wanted to have a quick meeting, which wasn't unusual. And we sat down in a conference room and he started the meeting out and said, "Well, Bill, the organization is restructuring and your job is eliminated and it's time for you to leave." And it was not, mean. It wasn't, there was nothing, no animosity. There was just very matter of fact. Mm-hmm. And that's, while there's been a lot of times in my life where there's been a lot of discomfort, that one created a ton of it. And that really propelled me in a lot of different ways. But, to the point where you and I wouldn't be on the phone here today, Warren, had I not been fired back during that period. But what was really kind of cute, side note to that is, so again, it was my team that really encouraged me to open the talk with that story about getting fired, which created a lot of vulnerability, which also, by the way, is a very good leadership trait. And I'm quite frankly, I'm not very good at that. So I opened the talk with that story, and then the talk ended up going viral, which you never expect those things to happen either. But what happened, so the talk was about growth and discomfort causing in the growth rings and how we can only grow in a state of discomfort. But after the talk, for the first 6 months, all people wanted to talk about, and I was being interviewed and on focus groups and, asked to give talks on what it's like to get fired. Which I had no intention of that happening at all, but that's really kind of one of the things that came out of it. So
yeah, that's really, I guess when you're vulnerable, right? That's what people resonate with them because they can see themselves in your talk. And that creates the belief that if you went through that, whatever challenge they're experiencing, they can do it as well.
Yeah, it is. I'll never forget sitting at our conference table when our VP of sales said, "Bill, why don't you just tell them the truth?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Tell them why we're all here. Tell them why we have jobs. Tell them that the only reason we're together right now is because you got fired." And I remember thinking to myself, there's probably going to be 1,500 people in the audience when I give this talk. Mm-hmm. And Then I was thinking there might be another 1,000 or two on YouTube that might actually watch the talk, on the YouTube TED channel.
Right.
And so yes, 1,800 people in the audience did hear it that day. And since that time, it's turned out to be almost 4 million people that have viewed the talk and have heard that story. So it was a great lesson for me, especially as you mentioned about vulnerability and vulnerability's impact on effectiveness.
So part of that, then, that formed your company. Then you did create what's called the growth rings, that concept of the growth rings. Can you explain to our listeners, kind of go deeper into that concept of how they can use the growth rings to help develop high performance?
Well, yes. And two things I would say. Number one is watch the TED Talk. It's, as you said, it's called Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. It's 12 minutes. It provides a really quick overview of it. But to elaborate on that, the growth rings allow, they represent environments that we control by and large. Now, for example, when I got fired, I went into a state of chaos. I could not control the input, which was getting fired. But what I can control is how I respond to that. And depending on how we respond to environmental influences dictates our growth. So we talk about, I share 4 environments within the growth rings: stagnation, chaos, which is the opposite of stagnation. There's order, and order is very dangerous because order is knowing inputs and having predictable outcomes. So I do something and it's a predictable outcome, and I do it and I get the same outcome. That's what creates comfort. Predictability creates comfort. But growth never occurs in a state of comfort. Growth only occurs in a state of discomfort, which is what we refer to as the complexity environment. Not complexity in terms of complicatedness, but complexity occurs when your order is changed. When order is changed, outputs then are unpredictable, and unpredictability creates discomfort. An organization puts out a new product for salespeople to sell. I mean, how many times have you done that and have salespeople are like, whoa, hold on, I'm just really getting up to date on mine. Now you're changing everything on me. You could actually sometimes change a compensation plan in the favor of salespeople. And sometimes, oh, hold on, we're changing it up here. Anytime things change, it creates resistance. And knowing that and acknowledging that, you can actually feel whether I am in a state of discomfort. And that is always a feeling, Warren. When I feel discomfort, I know that growth is coming. Now, it doesn't mean I want to stay there. We can't live a whole life in this discomfort state. We need the comfort that order brings that prepares us for times of discomfort when growth is being created. Right now, we're all facing a pandemic. I would call that a chaotic environment. But when the chaos is beginning to wear off, how are we responding to it? Are we going to respond to this pandemic as an opportunity? Now we're in a state of complexity, right? I'm no longer looking at it as chaos. I'm looking at it as, hey, there's an opportunity here. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to create something from this. And don't get me wrong, I think the pandemic, as sad, as tragic as it is, has unearthed a lot of wonderful things. We don't know where it's going to lead. With the wrong attitude, it'll be crippling. With the right attitude, it'll be very growth oriented for anybody who elects to look at it that way. I mean, right now, we've got, we just did some research, Warren. 75% of the people now that are working from home don't want to come back to work. They now believe they're more effective working from home, and they don't want to come back. Now organizations are thinking, oh my gosh, we've not trained them. How do we know if our managers, our leaders are doing things correctly if they're remote now? It's an opportunity. It's not crippling. It just depends on how you view it. So that's a long answer to a short question, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's really fascinating, that 75%. Now we return to work, because the paradigm prior to that was you're more productive at work than working at home.
Right. Now, whether or not they are more productive, we don't know yet. We're going to continue to measure it, but they believe they are. And if they believe they are, they're not going to want to come back. And if you force them back, they'll just find somebody else who allows them to work from home.
Exactly. So you did mention in reference to that you're the co-author of The Coaching Effect, but in chapter 3, you just kind of alluded to it in reference to, in that book in chapter 3, you tell your readers that leaders can, coaching quantity and quality can be measured and how to affect the team performance and the bottom line revenue. We started to touch on that. Could you kind of just expand on how you're going to be able to measure that a little bit deeper for our listeners?
Sure. So we have what's called a coaching effect survey, and it differs from everything that's out there in the sense of it's not engagement. You know, engagement would be a piece of it, but really what we want to know is what are our leaders doing that is impacting the performance of teams. And keep in mind, the only way to do this is to measure the people you're leading or coaching. That's it. And people say, well, I think 360s. No, it's not. The people that are the best gauge of how you treat them is the people themselves. I mean, if you're doing a customer service survey, you're not going to survey your customer service people. You're going to go to your clients, right? Because you're going to get most accurate information. And the same with leaders and the teams that report to them. You have to go straight to the horse's mouth, so to speak. And keep in mind, we're not looking for this big kumbaya, group hug, love fest environment. There is what we call healthy tension that has to exist. Trust relationships have to exist. There has to be good systems and processes in place that really measure this. And the only way to do that is by surveying the people that report to these leaders. That's way number one. The number two is to really kind of track 4 key activities that these leaders should be doing. And that is, are they doing career development plans with their people? Are they holding effective team meeting? Are they doing consistent one-to-one meetings? And are they giving objective feedback, a minimum of quarterly objective feedback, written documented feedback? I'm not talking about evaluations. I'm talking about feedback as a growth tool. If those activities are not being done with the right effectiveness and the right frequency, discretionary effort goes backwards. So those are the 2 ways to do it. Measuring quantity through what we have is what we call coaching cloud, and measuring quality through surveying the people that report to the leaders.
Yeah, excellent. I think their success leaves clues, and one of those clues are the books that readers read. So what are some authors that have influenced you along your career path?
You know, there are kind of two styles of books I read. Number one, which is really not even pertinent to this, is historical fiction. Oh, interesting. Which I enjoy reading. A lot of James Michener, things like that, which probably dates me a little bit, but he's fascinating. But what's endemic to them all is research. And I can read the Washington Post and get opinion articles all I want. I want stuff that's based on research. So Malcolm Gladwell's books, I love reading his work. Outliers. I love reading, the thing that really got me onto this is way back when in the 90s, Gallup put out a book, Kurt Kaufman and Marcus Buckingham, called First Break All the Rules, What the World's Greatest Managers Do Differently. And again, that was based on research. And so it's research-based books that I really turn to because I want to make decisions based on data. I have to do enough things based on gut anyway, so I want to do as much as I can based on data. So I would say data-driven authors like Malcolm Gladwell really fascinate me. Yeah,
I love that that slant and intentional about the books that you read instead of just the topic, but specifically research-based.
Yeah, they do. They have to have that for me.
So what does the future hold for you? Any special projects that you're working on, Bill?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that again. Boy, that was kind of you. Right now, it's the remote coaching stuff. with, probably half the workforce is working from home right now.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. Back at the beginning of March, right? Everybody said, hey, we're going to go home for a couple of weeks.
Right, exactly.
Everybody's going to work from home for a couple of weeks. And here we are several months later, and we're still working from home. And so right now, organizations that we're talking to are panicked because they don't know if their leaders are effective. So that's one of the things that we're really focusing on right now. And the other, we're still working down into Excel Sports. We're having fun, which is a little bit delayed right now because we don't know if there's going to be any sports coming up. Yes. But it's fun to see the impact. And what's really interesting that we're finding there is it's the same attributes that are leading and coaching successful business teams are the same attributes that are being used by athletic coaches to lead great teams, high-performing teams that way. So those are, and we've now ventured into education where we're actually measuring the impact teachers are having on students in classrooms. So we're having a lot of fun with that. We're going to continue that journey, always keeping in mind that leaders, nothing impacts performance, nothing impacts growth more than the leader. So we better know what they're doing.
Very fascinating. And certainly on the education front, that's definitely a new frontier is being changed dramatically.
Yeah, it is. It's very much a new frontier. So we're having a lot of fun and fascinating work there.
So if our listeners wanted to reach out and connect, what's the best way for them to be able to do that?
Well, anybody can always email me directly, which is B Eckstrom. You'll get my name off this podcast at excelinstitute.com. Bill Eckstrom on LinkedIn. I respond to every reach out I get on LinkedIn. Anybody can get me on Instagram. I'm a little active on Instagram, and that's Eckstrom WL on Instagram, Twitter at Bill Eckstrom. I get on all those channels for all the right reasons. And there's a lot of learning that takes place when I'm on those. So I do what I can, but anybody can reach out to me anytime with any questions, any comments on the growth rings or on coaching or anything like that.
Wow. Thank you for making yourself that available. I can make sure that information is in the show notes so our listeners can reach out as well.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Well, Bill, I appreciate you sharing your strategies and tips, helping our listeners break through their obstacles to achieve success.
Well, thank you, Warren. It's been an absolute treat, and you're asked wonderful questions. So best of luck to you, and thanks for having me as a guest.
All right. Thank you. Well, this is your host, Warren Wandling, saying next time, be resilient.